In today's world, African Americans dominate sports at all levels. From high school into college and even in professional sports, a lot of the big names that are talked about are black athletes. It is estimated that 65% of the NFL and 80% of the NBA are African Americans. However, it was not always this way. Due to discrimination by other athletes and fans, and laws that segregated the whites and the blacks, there was a time when African Americans were not allowed to compete with or against white players. This was a very difficult time in U.S. history. However, there were multiple key athletes who changed the outlook for African American athletes forever. In the late 1890s, black jockeys such as Isaac Murphy ruled the horse racing world. Murphy won 3 Kentucky Derbies and finished first in over 44% of all his races. Willie Sims, another excellent African American racer, is the only jockey to have won all 3 of the Triple Crown competitions. However, horse racing soon became an elite sport, and all African American jockeys were banned. Although they had such an amazing outlook in the late 1800s and early 1900s, this one ban has left very few African Americans in the world of racing today. Also around that time period was world-famous boxer Jack Johnson. By the early 1900s, Johnson had made a name for himself among other black boxers. However, Johnson had his eyes set on the heavyweight title. In 1908, the current heavyweight champion Tommy Burns agreed to fight Johnson only because promoters guaranteed him $30,000. The fight lasted 14 rounds when police had to step in to end it, but Johnson was named the winner. Johnson continued to win and had an impressive record of 54 wins, 11 losses, and 8 draws. Johnson showed that black athletes could compete and win against more superior whites. In 1915, Fritz Pollard was allowed to play football at Brown University, breaking the color barrier in big-time college football. During his career, Pollard often was forced to change clothes in closets, was refused shower services, traveled separately from his team, was spat upon by fans, had his hands cleated by opponents, and rarely jogged onto the field until moments before kickoff. Nevertheless, he starred as a player. Pollard led Brown to the first Rose Bowl. He was also the first black player named to Walter Camp's All-America list.
During the 1920s up until the 1930s was a time of the Harlem Renaissance. This literary, artistic, and intellectual movement helped develop new black cultural identity. Different types of music such as jazz began to develop, along with a high variety of African American literature. With music and literature, art developed as well. In 1920, the Negro National League was founded by Andrew Rube Foster, who was a former player, manager, and owner of the Chicago American Giants. Soon other rival leagues began to form in the East and the South. The leagues maintained a high level of professional skill and became the centerpieces for economic development in many black communities. In 1921, Frederick, aka Fritz Pollard, who was mentioned before, became the first African American head coach in the NFL. After he went pro with the Archon Pros and won the championship in 1920, he became coach the following year. In 1923 to 1927, the Eastern Colored League was formed in the Philadelphia area by Ed Bolden. It was also nicknamed the ECL. In 1924, D. Hart Hubbard became the first black to win an Olympic gold medal in the long jump at the Paris Games. He studied at University of Michigan, and while there, he won 6 straight AAU long jump titles. He broke many records in both long jump and sprinting. In 1928, after the ECL collapsed, the American Negro League was established by 5 former ECL teams. In 1931 to 1945, Henry Armstrong, nicknamed Homicide Hank, was the only African American fighter to simultaneously hold world titles in 3 weight classes. Many regard him as one of the greatest fighters of all time. In 1933, 31 years after allowing limited integration, the NFL banned black athletes from in-league play. In 1936, Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals in the Summer Olympic Games located in Berlin, Germany. In 1937, Negro American League, was also known as the NAL, was launched, containing teams in both the South and Midwest. Containing 8 teams, creating this new league was in response to the collapse of the East-West League. In 1937 to 1949, Joe Louis, aka Brown Bomber, won the World Heavyweight Boxing title, which he holds until retirement in 1949. He was a 4-time Ring Magazine Fighter of the Year and also named Greatest Puncher of All Time. In the 1940s, the New York Giants and Detroit Lions decided to integrate their teams.
During the 1940s to 1960s, blacks didn't have the same civil rights as whites in America. Many states had Jim Crow laws that forbade many African Americans to interact with their white counterparts in a variety of settings. Over these 20 years, African Americans struggled with racial barriers but showed an outstanding leap into desegregation in the sports world. By 1960, the civil rights movement was hitting its peak, and black athletes definitely left their mark and exemplified honorable perseverance for the rest of the African American society. In 1946, Paul Brown of the Cleveland Browns hired Bill Willis and Marion Motley. Within that same year, the Los Angeles Rams signed Kenny Washington and Woody Strode. Blacks were finally admitted to the ranks of pro football. Ironically, at that time, African American NFL players generally led their teams in statistical categories. In 1947, Jackie Robinson broke Major League Baseball's color barrier when he signed to the Brooklyn Dodgers. Jackie was a star in the Negro Leagues and was the first African American to play Major League Baseball. His first Major League game for the Dodgers was on April 15th. He was booed, but by the end of the season, he won over the Dodgers fans. Within his first season, Robinson batted a .297, led the league in stolen bases, and was named National Rookie of the Year. Jackie Robinson has been noted as the athlete who opened the door for other black athletes to participate in pro sports. The following year, in 1948, Alice Coachman became the first African American woman to win a gold medal at the London Olympics, high jumping 5'6" and 1/8 of an inch. Alice's accomplishment was not only a big deal for blacks, but for our entire country. She was also the first female athlete from the U.S. to win a medal of any kind at these Olympics. In 1950, Althea Gibson became the first black woman to play at the U.S. Nationals. She advanced to the second round of the tournament, and by doing so, showed ignorant fans that blacks belonged on the tennis court too. 7 years later, she won the U.S. Nationals and Wimbledon, the oldest and most prestigious tennis tourney in the world. After the win, Gibson was welcomed home with a parade in New York. Just 3 years later, in 1953, America witnessed yet another big move by African Americans in the football world, when Willie Thrower became the first black quarterback in the league, playing for the Chicago Bears. In January of 1958, Willie O'Ree played for the Boston Bruins, becoming the first African American to play in the National Hockey League. Though he only played 2 seasons for the Bruins because of an eye injury, he opened the way for other blacks on the ice like Jerome Iginla. In 1960, Wilma Rudolph became the fastest woman in the world. At the 1960 Rome Olympics, she was the first African American woman to win 3 gold medals. She won the 100, 200, and anchored in the 4x1 relay. She won the 100-meter race with 11 seconds, broke the 200-meter race Olympic record with 24 seconds, and her relay broke the world record, running a 44.4-second 4x1 relay.
In the 1960s came about the Civil Rights Movement. The foundation of this movement rested on integration and equality. The philosophy of the movement was to reveal to America the hypocrisies that existed in American society. For the black athletes at this time, they came to realize that breaking records, winning medals, doesn't alter their own status as second-class citizens outside the sports arena. For example, Muhammad Ali, once known as Cassidy Clay, took part in the 1960s Olympic Games as a boxer. He won the light heavyweight boxing title. His victory was praised and admired worldwide. However, when he returned home to Louisville, Kentucky, he recalled being ordered out by the owner of the restaurant and followed by a gang of white men who attacked him. This goes to prove one of the many hypocrisies in American society during this time. Inside the sports arena, black athletes are seen as Americans. Outside, they're just black. The late 1960s, protests by black athletes were widespread. Black athlete revolt as a culmination of extreme hatred and injustice in America, manifested in the murder of Malcolm X, the bombing of 4 black girls in Birmingham, Alabama, and the assassination of Martin Luther King in April of 1968. Many proposed to boycott the 1968 Olympic Games unless certain demands were met. Although the boycott failed, it inspired sprinters Tommie Smith and John Carlos to protest against social inequalities. On the 16th of October in 1968, during the national anthem, Tommie Smith and John Carlos each raised a black gloved fist in the air until the anthem was finished. Tommie Smith stated in his autobiography, Silent Gesture, that the gesture was not a black power salute, but a human rights salute. Their salute also resembled Lady Liberty lifting her torch, and that was ironic because Lady Liberty represented liberty and justice for all, and during this time, blacks were not being shown liberty or justice.
Although they were persecuted at the time, these dedicated and persistent athletes set the stage for future African Americans who also wanted to compete at high levels. Not only did they break color barriers in sports, but these people helped integration at all levels and stopped the assumption that white people are superior to African Americans, along with other racial stereotypes.